In the quiet, close-knit town of Brooksville, where everyone knows their neighbors and life moves at a gentle pace, the shocking death of respected businessman John Anderson sent ripples of disbelief through the community. Found lifeless in his own home under mysterious circumstances, John's sudden demise left more questions than answers. Was it a tragic accident, a hidden illness, or something far more sinister? As detectives Sarah Miller and James Carter delve into the case, they uncover a tangled web of secrets, lies, and betrayal that threatens to tear the town apart. Behind the facade of a perfect marriage and a successful life, a darker truth lurks, one that involves love, deceit, and a chilling plot that no one saw coming. This is the story of the deadly lie, love, deceit, and murder in Brooksville. Respected local businessman John Anderson was discovered deceased in his house under strange circumstances. The villagers were shocked and in amazement when the word broke like wildfire. When Lisa Anderson, John's wife, discovered his body, she frantically dialed 911 to alert the authorities. The detectives were met with a confusing and terrifying scene. John was lying still in the living room, showing no indications of a struggle or an attempted break-in. The preliminary investigation pointed to an unexpected, abrupt death, but the seasoned detectives sensed something wasn't quite right. The case was given to Detective Sarah Miller and Detective James Carter, her colleague. They were both experienced and industrious, and they understood that in a tiny town like Brooksville, people kept secrets from one another, some of which could be lethal. The townspeople were anxious to find out what had happened to one of their own, so they waited with bated breath as they started their investigation. As the society conjectured about the reason for John's premature death, rumors started to circulate. While some hinted to personal problems, others speculated about his financial transactions. They had no idea that the truth was much more complex and evil than they could have ever imagined. The investigators discovered a labyrinth of deceit, treachery, and covert intentions as they dug deeper into John's life and relationships. These revelations hinted to a frightening conclusion. John Anderson was a complex individual. As the 45-year-old proprietor of Anderson Supplies, a well-known hardware business in Brooksville for more than 20 years, he had established a prosperous career. John was well-liked in the community and well-known for his kindness and dedication. He developed a reputation as a cornerstone of Brooksville society by frequently making donations to neighborhood charities and supporting young athletes. People who were close to John knew about his personal troubles despite his public persona. There had been tension in his marriage to Lisa for a number of years. After meeting in college and getting married young, the couple's initial excitement gradually faded and was replaced by daily conflicts. John is described by friends as diligent and committed, yet he can also be aloof and preoccupied with his profession. John appeared to be a man firmly rooted in his routine based on his last known activities. He had been at his store the day before, handling inventory and assisting customers. He left work at his regular hour, made a quick stop for a cup of coffee at a nearby diner, and then made his way home. It was verified by surveillance tape that he got to his home at 6:45 p.m. that night. John and Lisa were going to have a quiet evening together, talking about their impending trip and watching TV. But Lisa said that immediately after supper John had complained of feeling ill. The last time she saw him alive, he had retired to the living room to rest. Later, when she went to check on him, she saw he was not responding, so she dialed 911. An inconclusive autopsy report was issued initially. There were no overt indications of trauma or foul play, and the toxicological findings were still awaited. It was clear to Detectives Miller and Carter that further investigation was necessary in order to find any information that would shed light on John's unexpected demise. They started by speaking with Lisa and John's closest friends in an attempt to put together what happened before that terrible night. When Lisa Anderson was first interrogated by the detectives, she was the epitome of anguish. She had piercing blue eyes and auburn hair, and at 42, she was a striking woman, her rims crimson from crying. Her anguish appeared sincere, but Miller and Carter were wise enough not to believe anything they were told. They had to know how she felt about John and whether or not she was responsible for his passing. After their two kids, Jake and Emily, left for college, Lisa started working as a marketing manager for a nearby real estate company. Friends described Lisa as gregarious and charming, and she was widely respected in the neighborhood. Some did point out that she and Jan had a difficult marriage. Rumors circulated about conflicts and a deepening emotional gulf between them. Lisa gave a tremulous account of what happened on the night that John died when asked about it. She told how John had chosen to lie down in the living room after dinner since he was complaining of feeling sick. Sensing he was tired, she had given him some room and gone upstairs to read. She walked downstairs to find him unresponsive after waiting for him for hours on end. Lisa had a complicated response to John's passing. She conveyed a profound sense of loss and grief, but she also alluded to resentment that had been simmering beneath their marriage's surface. She acknowledged that they had been going through a difficult time, but she remained adamant that she loved John and that she wanted to resolve their differences. Subtle contradictions in Lisa's testimony were discovered by the investigators as they dug deeper. There were times when her sadness looked almost theatrical, and she seemed hesitant to talk about some parts of her relationship with John. Miller and Carter made the decision to delve deeper, concentrating on Lisa's relationships and personal life outside of her marriage. They quickly located Lisa's colleague Mark Benson thanks to their inquiry. Lisa and Mark had been spending a lot of time together, both in and out of the office, according to the results of the initial questions. The detectives felt there was more to Lisa's story than she had revealed because of the nature of their relationship, which raised concerns. With the help of this fresh lead, they started to piece together an affair that would throw doubt on John's passing and suggest hitherto unidentified motives. Following the discovery of John's body, Detectives Miller and Carter showed up at the Anderson residence the following morning. Police tape was used to demarcate the modest two-story residence on Maple Street. Teams from the forensics department were hard at work, going through every square inch of the property looking for hints. Experienced and meticulous, Miller began her investigation in the living room, where John's body had been discovered. The room was very tidy. John was lying on the couch, looking as content as though he was just dozing. He had no visible wounds or marks on his body, nor were there any indications of a struggle. Until a thorough autopsy was conducted, the medical examiner's preliminary assessment indicated that John had passed away from unidentified reasons. Miller's companion Carter was outside chatting with emergency personnel. He was a tough guy with a can-do attitude who had a talent for starting conversations. He obtained statements from the patrol policemen and paramedics who had arrived initially at the scene. There were no obvious indicators of forced entrance or foul play, and none of them had observed anything unusual. Miller went inside and looked at Lisa, who was sitting at the kitchen table with a tissue in her hand. Lisa's hands shook as she related what had happened the night before. Her account matched what she told the operator when she called 911. She had left John to rest since he seemed ill, but when she returned later, he was not responding. Miller saw the way Lisa's gaze flitted over the space, evading close inspection. Carter met with a number of neighbors after their initial interviews were over, and most of them thought the Andersons were a quiet, reclusive couple. A few said they had occasionally overheard arguments, but nothing that had caused them much concern. One neighbor who remembered seeing John the previous evening was Mrs. Evans, an older widow who lived next door. Waving as he made his way to his front door, he appeared to be his normal self. The investigators went over their notes back at the station. They started with Lisa and added friends, relatives, and co-workers to their list of possible witnesses and people of interest. Although the initial evidence was ambiguous, Miller and Carter were committed to investigating every possibility. Results from forensic analysis started to come in. According to the autopsy, John had not sustained any exterior injuries. However, toxicology testing indicated that his system had traces of an alien material. This discovery sparked fresh inquiries into the possibility that John had been purposefully poisoned or that his death was natural. Although they thought about the possibility of an unintentional overdose, the investigators chose to concentrate on looking into any possible foul play. Miller and Carter, meantime, were probing Lisa's history and actions. They asked for her bank statements and phone logs in order to check for any irregularities. Lisa appeared sincere in her first shock and grief, but the detectives were aware that grief may conceal a multitude of emotions. They had to know her intentions, her relationships, and her mental state in the final weeks before John passed away. Then, when they came across a string of texts between Lisa and her co-worker, Mark Benson, their inquiry took a drastic turn. The communications alluded to a far closer relationship than that of co-workers. This information gave the investigators a fresh viewpoint on the case and encouraged them to investigate Lisa's relationship with Mark further in order to determine whether it had anything to do with John's tragic death. The investigation took a significant turn when Lisa's involvement with Mark Benson was uncovered. Their intimate text conversations to one another were rather clear about what kind of relationship they had. Lisa worked at the real estate firm with a charming man in his early 40s named Mark, and they clearly had a bond that extended beyond work. Investigators Miller and Carter made the decision to reinterrogate Lisa. They presented her with the proof of her affair this time. Lisa sobbed after seeing the text messages, even though she had first denied any wrongdoing. She acknowledged the affair and stated that it had begun some months prior, but she was adamant that it was unrelated to John. Lisa talked about how her marriage had left her feeling isolated and undervalued. John had grown more and more aloof, preoccupied with his business rather than their relationship. Mark was observant and compassionate, and she looked to him for solace and company. She insisted that she had never meant anything bad to happen to John, but the affair had been an escape, a way for her to feel alive again. Miller and Carter were aware that extramarital affairs could serve as strong inducements to commit murder, but they still required hard proof to connect Lisa or Mark to John. They made the decision to question Mark inside. Mark was helpful, yet uneasy. Confirming the affair, he described it as a brief relationship that had brought comfort to both Lisa and himself. They would have to confirm his claim that he was at home the night it happened and had no knowledge of John. Lisa and Mark had been preparing to begin a new life together, the investigators learned as they dug deeper into the affair. Emails and further text messages disclosed conversations about moving out of Brooksville and into another city. They had even investigated possible jobs and properties in other places. This gave the impression that the pair was desperate to leave their current situation, which increased doubts about their role in John's demise. The case became more complicated as a result of the scandal. Lisa appeared to have a very clear motive. She wanted to be with Mark free from the stigma of divorce in their traditional culture. But Miller and Carter had to prove that the affair was connected to John's abduction. In order to find any chemicals that could be linked to Lisa or Mark, they started by going over the toxicology report again. Also, the detectives began to delve deeper into Mark's past. They learned that he had recently been into a court battle with a former employer and had a history of financial difficulties. This information raised the possibility that Mark had ulterior motives for wanting John out of the picture, especially if he thought Lisa could support them financially. Miller and Carter were resolved to find the truth with these fresh clues. They had to put together a case that linked the affair, the motivations, and the possibility that Mark or Lisa had planned John's murder. The investigators remained unwavering in their pursuit of justice despite the high stakes and increasing pressure. Though Mark Benson put on an air of confidence and composure, his facade started to show weaknesses when the detectives scrutinized him. A year earlier, Lisa and Mark, both real estate agents, had joined the same firm. He was a seasoned agent in Brooksville, having gained a reputation as one of the best at 41 thanks to his charisma and ability to persuade. But his private life was significantly less secure. Mark insisted during the interview that the only thing he and Lisa shared was emotional support for one another. Although he acknowledged that he had fallen in love, he maintained that they had no intention of hurting John. His alibi, which the investigators would have to confirm, was that he was in his flat the night of John's murder. When Miller and Carter looked into Mark's past, they discovered a number of warning signs. Mark made his way to Brooksville from a string of unsuccessful business endeavors in bigger cities. Due to a botched investment, he had accrued a substantial debt and was being sued by a former business partner. Documents pertaining to his finances revealed that Mark was living beyond his means and finding it difficult to pay off his obligations and support his way of life. Subsequent analysis of Mark's emails and phone logs showed that he and Lisa had regular, covert communications. They talked a lot about how unhappy they were with their life at the time and imagined living together in the future. Mark expressed his yearning to start over and his dissatisfaction with the barriers in their way in one particularly candid email. Although this did not prove a murderous scheme, it strengthened the argument that he had a compelling reason to kill John. The investigators also discovered that Mark had lately named Lisa as the beneficiary of a substantial life insurance policy that he had taken out on himself. This finding was especially troubling since it raised the possibility that Mark was preparing for a future in which Lisa's recent widowhood would provide him with financial security. Miller and Carter went to Mark's apartment complex in order to confirm his alibi. Around 7 p.m., the building manager verified that Mark had been spotted entering his unit on the evening of John's disappearance, but no one could corroborate his presence there the whole time. The investigators were forced to take advantage of the window of opportunity this created. Mark's tale started to seem inconsistent as they questioned him more. He stammered over specifics on his location and his conversations with Lisa. Carter and Miller applied further pressure, trying to unnerve him with psychological tricks. Mark was more defensive, and his composure began to waver. During a heated exchange of questions, Mark blurted out that Lisa had been the one to offer that they could start dating sooner if John was not involved. This charge put Lisa back in the spotlight and made people wonder if someone else was really in charge of the affairs leading up to John's disappearance. Was Mark attempting to shift the blame, or was there another, darker plot at work? The detectives had to sort through a maze of falsehoods, chances, and motivations while keeping a close eye on Lisa and Mark. To decide which of them, if either, was to blame for John's demise, they required additional hard proof. They believed that the next jigsaw piece would help them get closer to the truth as they carried out their research. Miller and Carter's research took many unexpected detours that made the case more difficult to solve. Two pieces of information emerged that contradicted their presumptions and sent them in unanticipated directions. Though each revelation drew them nearer to the truth, it also presented new challenges. One such turn of events was the completion of the toxicology report. It was determined that the foreign material in John's body was a rare, quick-acting toxin. Because this poison was difficult to get, it was likely the result of deliberate action rather than an overdose. Now that they had hard proof that John's death was a murder, the detectives had to figure out who was in possession of the material. Their investigations took them to a neighborhood drugstore where the poison had been bought. Although the pharmacist recalled selling the drug to a man who fit Mark's description, there was insufficient evidence to establish a clear connection between Mark and the transaction. Although it raised more questions, it was insufficient to result in an arrest. An anonymous tip was given to the cops at the drugstore while they were investigating the lead. Shortly before John passed away, the caller claimed to have seen Lisa meeting with a man in a remote area. This information raised the possibility that Lisa was secretly planning something, maybe involving Mark. When the police followed the call, they discovered that it came from a disposable phone, which made it hard to figure out who made it. Concurrently, a startling revelation arose from John's commercial activities. Documents related to finances showed that John had lately moved a sizable amount of money to an unidentified account. After more research, it was discovered that Alex Thompson, a private investigator, was the owner of this account. When pressed, Thompson said that John had employed him to track Lisa because he thought she may be unfaithful. This information presented a picture of a guy who was not only aware of his wife's extramarital affair, but also actively seeking out proof. Photographs and thorough meeting logs between Lisa and Mark were included in the private investigator's report. In addition to confirming the affair, these documents revealed unsettling details about Lisa's actions. Thompson claimed that Lisa had been acting strangely for the past few weeks, talking about how unhappy she was and how angry she was with John. She alluded to feeling stuck and wanting to leave her marriage by any means necessary in one of the recorded conversations. Miller and Carter were forced to reconsider their strategy in light of this new information. They made the decision to thoroughly examine the Anderson residence in the hopes of discovering evidence that would directly connect Lisa or Mark to the murder. They uncovered files of the same uncommon poison in John's system in a concealed compartment in Lisa's closet during their search. This devastating discovery raised the possibility that Lisa was directly involved in the crime. When Lisa saw this evidence, her attitude changed. She became combative and defiant, accusing the investigators of attempting to frame her. She adamantly maintained that she was unaware of the poison and that it had to have been planted by someone to implicate her. But just when the investigators thought they were getting close to a conclusion, something unexpected happened. Mark Benson disclosed fresh details, saying Lisa had tricked him into assisting her in obtaining the poison. by providing emails and messages in which Lisa detailed her plan to poison John. He created the impression that Mark was not the mastermind, but rather a reluctant partner. Miller and Carter were faced with a difficult dilemma because Lisa and Mark had contradictory accounts. They had to figure out who was covering up and who was telling the truth. The investigation had uncovered a complex web of opportunities, motivations, and dishonesty, but the precise chain of events that ultimately resulted in John's death was still unknown. On the other hand, Mark's story portrayed him as a tool in Lisa's plan. He said how Lisa had progressively brought up the notion of poisoning John, painting it as a last-ditch effort to get herself out of an intolerable predicament. While acknowledging that he had assisted her in obtaining the poison, he maintained that he had no intention of John's death. The way he portrayed Lisa as the mastermind complicated the case even further. The investigators decided to carry out a last round of intensive interrogations in order to get to the bottom of things. Their goal was to expose any discrepancies that may blow the case wide open, or to catch one or both of the suspects lying. Miller and Carter were aware that deciphering Lisa and Mark's genuine motivations and the nature of their relationship would be crucial to solving the murder. Finally, during a heated interview, Lisa broke down. She said that she had felt stuck in her marriage and that she could only get out by getting rid of John. She persisted, nevertheless, that Mark had encouraged her to carry out the plan and had been an active participant. Her confession gave important new light on her mental state and desire to kill in order to fulfill her ambitions. The investigators focused their attention once more on Mark after learning this new information. With the intention of getting a response, they confronted him about Lisa's confession. Mark started to lose it when he realized that his attempts to shift the responsibility weren't working. Although he acknowledged that he had assisted Lisa, he insisted that she had tricked him from the beginning. The motives and circumstances leading up to John's were made more evident by the admissions made by both suspects. To ensure that justice would be served, the detectives now needed to put the last pieces of the puzzle together and decide how to move forward with making arrests and filing charges. When the investigators took one more look at the physical evidence and time frame, they had a breakthrough in the case. After some initial investigation, they uncovered an important piece of evidence that had been missed: a security camera from a neighbor's home that had filmed part of the Andersons' backyard. Mark's entry into the Anderson residence on the night of John's was captured on camera, refuting his alibi and establishing a clear connection between him and the scene of the killing. After several days of deliberation, the jury found Lisa and Mark both guilty. Because of his alleged little role in the crime, Mark was given a term that was slightly less than Lisa's, who was given a life sentence without the chance of parole. Although the town of Brooksville had to deal with the fallout from the tragedy, there was some comfort in knowing that justice had been done.